Drones in 2023. Many industries have benefited from the introduction of drones. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the history of drones, how they've come about, how they've moved from the military into hobby and into commercial flights, when that all took place, about flyaways. We'll talk about the rules for flying recreationally, talk about flying with a Part 107 remote pilot certification. We'll talk about insurance possibilities, what industries can you work in if you have a license as a drone, with a drone. And then I will end off with manufacturer websites and the forums for those major or top drone manufacturers that I list. So I'll go ahead and get us started. It's never too late to chase your dreams. See, I have a fleet of 7 drones. I'm 63 years old. I really was late getting started in this, and actually it's not that uncommon for older people to get involved in drones these days. Little bit of history about me. I built my first computer when I was only 16 years old, and it was only 64 kilobytes, which at that time we thought was a really big deal. It could only run a few computer games and was basically a word processor, but it was something really special at that time. Of course, with only 64 kilobyte of memory, we know that was really kind of a joke, and it makes us laugh today. Certainly makes me laugh. With more than 45 years experience in building computer networks, including the security for them, and doing computer programming in a whole bunch of different languages. I start all the way back with machine language and basic symbolic language, went on through COBOL and Fortran, and became involved in so many more later, because then it started to move from the typical programming, where bottom-up programming, then we started to work with objects, which is top-down programming. And so it's a whole different environment, and that's when I went back to school to actually get a degree in computer programming after I had already worked in it for 20 years. So I was an amateur photographer that started when I was 14. I found video just a few years ago playing with an Android phone. And when I did that, I realized that I really found my passion in being a creator and utilizing video to do that. I started a video business in October 2017, and I did it because I saw a gap in the market. There was very little video content that was customized for small businesses, and platform viewers were just eating it up like candy. That was the hottest thing, and in fact it continues to grow. More than 85% of viewers want their content through video because it gives it to them. They don't have to read, they don't have to give it much effort. Just click a button and start off the video, and it gives the information to them on a silver platter. I began acquiring both knowledge and equipment, and then I started out helping my clients by utilizing animated features for video and slideshow videos. Then I bought my first DSLR camera, and I found out that I really loved doing events. And I've done events locally of all different types. How did I get into drones and why? Well, I have a nephew who's about 30 years old, and he's what they call a rail fan. He chases trains, and he used to do it with a ground camera and take little short video clips, but mostly take photos of it. Well, he learned about drones, and he got himself a drone and started flying, and he would chase the trains with his drone to make considerable footage, and it was really very beautiful. I'm friends with him on Facebook. I would see these on a regular basis, and I would get envious, and I would think, since I was a little girl, I always wanted to fly. Well, one day I suddenly realized that I could incorporate this into my business. Now, I'm 58 years old at this time, and I basically had given up on my dream to fly. But when I recognized that I could use drones in my business, I went ahead and chased after acquiring my FAA Part 107 license. And the reason for doing that is in order to use your footage or photos, anything for a business or in any type of way that could be construed as anything other than recreational, then you must have a Part 107 remote pilot certification. So I actually did acquire that at 59 years old in 2017 in January. I had only bought my first drone in near the end of 2018. So as I said earlier, I own a fleet of 7 drones, and that doesn't include any of the toy drones that I own. They're less than 4 inches. I have 2 drones of the same model, and the reason I have them is I crashed one of those. I messed up the gimbal, and so I started learning how to replace a gimbal. Well, that took me a while. It was really taking me some time. So I purchased another DJI Mavic Pro at the time to replace that one. And now I have 2. Aerial footage gets a lot of attention, and the novelty really has not worn off yet today. Drones are a great addition to any type of video production business, and there's actually a lot of photographers that can benefit with drones because of how good the cameras really have gotten on them and the stabilization. SUAVs, small unmanned aerial vehicles. They're aircraft with no onboard crew, obviously, and no passengers. These can be automated drones where they run from a computer program. Simply a program runs, they may have a connection with the drone, and it takes off and runs a mission. Or you can have remote piloted vehicles, which is somebody with a controller who actually is making the aircraft move under their power. Military UAVs, they don't call them small, they just call them UAVs, can fly for really long periods of time, and they have roles in many aspects of aviation. So this is about drones and what they really are. In the military, as I said, they drop the S. They aren't considered small because they actually have a wide variety of vehicles that they are able to use. The first pilotless vehicles were developed by the military. During World War I, both the U.S. and Britain had projects going where they were working on drones. Britain had the Aerial Target, which is a small radio-controlled aircraft, and they started doing testing in March of 1917. At the same time, the Americans were working on the aerial torpedo, and that was known as the Kettering bug, and they did the first testing on that in October of 1918. Although they had a lot of success and the testing was very promising, they did not use these operationally at any time during the war. UAVs may have been around a lot longer than you may realize. Did you know that the first unmanned aerial vehicle was actually a hot air balloon that was remotely controlled? This was in 1783, and it was located in France. Now, jump ahead, and I'm skipping a lot of history. If you want to go back, you can get more yourself and pick up on this topic, but I could only cover a limited amount of history here. So jump ahead 66 years, and this will take us to July of 1849, where a UAV served as a balloon carrier. It's a precursor, or much like an aircraft carrier concept, where you take the vehicle to a certain point and launch it from there. This was the first offensive use of air power in naval aviation. So they were using them for warfighting instruments. UAVs are really going to be here for a long time to come. The military is still working on missions and different model aircraft on a regular basis. They do a lot of testing. Model Aeronautics, Walter and Bill Good, who are twin brothers, developed the very first hobby radio-controlled airplanes. This was back in 1938. They were using an aircraft with an 8-foot wingspan. That was a hobby craft. Can you even imagine what that must have been like? Incredible. Really cool. The first drone prototype was for military use, as I indicated. It was based on the B-17's Flying Fortress airplane. And in August of 1946, they took 2 of these prototypes to fly from Hilo National Air Base in Hawaii all the way to Muroc Air Force Base in California. They used remotely controlled by the U.S. Armed Forces personnel who were nearby in the area. This is a 2,600-mile flight that they took using the 2 prototypes, and it took them almost 15 hours to complete. During this, they set a new endurance record for remote-controlled aircraft. None had ever flown that far before. There are several aeronautic associations that I'd just like to mention. The Experimental Amateur Built Aircraft, the EAA, the AUVSI, and we'll talk about these, the Academy of Model Aeronautics, or the AMA. Okay, so a little bit about the Experimental Amateur Built Aircraft. The EAA is an organization that was founded in 1953, and they do have a focus for amateur built aircraft. Okay, since that time, the interests of the EAA have expanded to include all of the drones and such that we have today. But the core of their activities continues to revolve around that are do-it-yourself or home-built craft. The AUVSI are the Association for Uncrewed Vehicle Systems International. They are more than 60 countries represented. They incorporate industry, government, and academia, both from corporations and professional individuals. The AUVSI members work in defense, civil, and commercial markets as well. The Academy of Model Aeronautics is one that I really like. It was founded back in 1936. So this is when you were talking the little gas-powered airplanes they had. And actually, some of them weren't so little. Some of them were actually very big. You can join the largest model aviation organization in the world by joining them. A membership with them covers you whenever you fly and wherever you fly. It doesn't matter what you're flying, as long as it's for recreational fun, use, and you operate within the code that they have in the AMA National Model Aircraft Safety Codes. And then you're good to take off. It's a lot of fun. It's a great organization, and we'll talk about one of the reasons why I like them so much. One of the new things in the agenda is remote ID, and this is going to take place and move into effect on September 16th in 2023 this year, as long as everything goes as it's been planned. Remote ID is the ability of the drone in flight to provide identification and location information that can be received by other parties. In other words, it could be pinged and then it sends back an identification information. So that's what it is. Why do we need remote ID? Well, remote ID helps the FAA and law enforcement and other federal agencies to find the control station. Say a drone appears to be flying in an unsafe manner or where it's not allowed to fly, maybe over a military operation or something, then it's really important for them to be able to locate. Right now, the way we have things, there is no way to do that. So remote ID will also lay the foundation for the safety and security measures needed for more complex drone operations. What I believe one of the things that's going to be introduced will be regulations that allow us to fly beyond visual line of sight. Currently, we have regulations that keep us within visual line of sight. I always have to have my eyes on my drone as a pilot. There are actually a lot of people that fought this in the beginning. I was one of those people. The reason is that we have some people that get a little renegade. They think they should be able to control those who fly drones. They may not want them over their house or whatever their objection is, but there have been actual altercations as a result. So some of the drone pilots, including myself, feel a little unsafe with the fact that people will be able to pick up signals and find out where you are flying that drone from. So, you need to know, though, there are 3 ways that pilots can meet the requirements that will be starting in September for remote ID. The first is that you can operate a standard remote ID drone. What this means is you purchase a drone that already has a device within it that continues to broadcast the identification and location information about that drone as it's flying and the control station, so where the pilot is standing. I'll show you a picture. It kind of gives you an idea of what that's like. So your drone is putting the signal out from the device itself and sending it through the airwaves, and all of your phones, tablets, computers, devices can pick up that radio frequency using Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. Okay, the second way you can meet the requirement is to operate a drone with what they call a broadcast module. This will be something that you retrofit to your drone, which broadcasts the identification and location information about the drone and its takeoff location, all within accordance of the remote ID's rules, the requirements that they've laid out for this. The one difference is that if you have a retrofitted drone with this device, you must maintain visual contact with your drone at all times during its flight. This is part of what leads me to believe that we are going to be able to fly our drones beyond visual line of sight, and that's pretty exciting because there have only been limited people that can do this, and they must have a very specific waiver in order to fly beyond visual line of sight. You've not been able to do that as a Part 107 pilot. So this again is what it looks like. It's the same type of thing. Your craft, though, has this device retrofitted to the outside of it, most likely. And then it puts out that signal through radio frequencies, and your devices can pick it up using Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. Okay, and then there's a third option for meeting remote ID, and that's that you actually can operate without it. However, it can only be done at FAA-recognized identification areas. These are called FRIAs. They're sponsored by community-based organizations or educational institutions. Schools may have them a lot. FRIAs are the only location that unmanned aircraft, so your drones and your radio-controlled planes, may operate without broadcasting remote ID message elements. These are the places where many of the pilots for the gas-operated airplanes have been flying for a long time with the clubs. They have had designated areas to fly from, as well as open community areas as well. So this will look a little more like this, where you have definite boundary areas, and I'm not sure how they will notify the drone, but the drone will somehow know. Perhaps it won't fly beyond the boundaries of that, because we do have that, what is called geofence, so they can mark it off so that the vehicle can't move beyond a certain airspace. So that's how that would work, is you just literally have an airspace that you're allowed to fly in, and you have to remain within the boundaries of that. So the first drone for hobby use. After 150 years of military use, the first hobbyist drones were started in 2006. That wasn't that long ago. What is that, 17 years ago? And it started all of it with DJI. I'm sure most of you are familiar with them. The Federal Aviation Administration, also known as the FAA, issued its first commercial drone permit in that same year. The first drone controlled with a smartphone and first to hold a camera. In 2010, Parrot unveiled its AR drone. This had self-stabilizing gyros and an FPV camera. These were really something special. In 2013, DJI Phantom 1 began with a modern drone craze. It could hold a GoPro camera, and it could be controlled from a distance, which is something they hadn't been able to do at all. In 2013, drones were first considered for being used as a delivery method. Okay, so your first smart consumer drone was made by DJI, and it wasn't until they got to the Phantom 3. In 2015, stabilized 4K camera with FPV feed that you could see on your phone or your tablet, and you could fly up to 5 kilometers away, and your flights could last about 23 minutes. Now, when they say 23 minutes, you actually have to leave a few minutes because you don't want to fly your battery down to 0%. I actually bring my batteries back or start my flights back at about 30%. Once in a while, I set a couple of my drones at 25%. It also depends on weather conditions. If you have a lot of wind, make sure you start early. In 2016, autonomous passenger drone cars were created by EHang. They transport a passenger anywhere for up to 23 minutes using an electric motor, and batteries is all they have. In 2016, DJI came out with the Mavic Pro. It was the first foldable consumer drone. So use of drones continues to grow rapidly. In 2018, DJI came out with the Mavic Air, the Mavic 2, and Autel and Parrot continue to release new models for both hobby and professional drone sectors. In 2019, under 250 gram limitation with 4K camera and stabilization drone, which came out as the Mavic Mini. This was done because US and many European countries had just released a new regulation that stated any drones that were over that 250 gram limit had to be registered. In 2020 and 2021, drones were used a lot during the pandemic to deliver supplies, work with the police as far as social distancing and quarantine. They actually had them flying in the air with repeated looped messages that reminded people to maintain social distancing and stay home if they were sick. SUAVs have a weight range. It starts from 0.55 pounds or 250 grams, and it goes up to 55 pounds, which are considered a drone for personal use or under Part 107 certification. So drones that are smaller than 0.55 pounds do not require any kind of registration by the FAA. They see them as toys, and they aren't concerned about any damage they might do to person or property. Those that are larger than 55 pounds are in a totally different class. Under the FAA, they require a Part 61 or Part 91 license, which are actually for manned flights in order to take off. Many people assume that recreational flight just means that you're not flying for business or you're not being compensated, but that's really not always the case. Compensation, or whether or not you're receiving financial pay for it, doesn't determine whether or not the flight is recreational. Before you fly your drone, you need to know which regulations apply to your flight. That's determined whether you're flying recreationally or under Part 107. The default regulation for drones weighing under 55 pounds is the Part 107. Almost all non-recreational drone flight is regulated by Part 107. Now, there's lots of non-recreational activities that need to be considered because you can't do them without being licensed. That's things as simple as taking photos of a property or a service to help somebody out, doing roof inspections, taking pictures of the high school football game, and then they put it on their website. These things can all be considered non-recreational. In other words, you just weren't out flying for the day to enjoy and have a good time. Somebody wanted something from what you did. Those can all be considered non-recreational, and they do require a Part 107. So if your flight isn't just for pleasure, you could be putting yourself at jeopardy, which means you might not be able to get a license later if you want one. Remember, if you're not sure which rule applies to your flight, fly under Part 107. This means if you're not licensed at minimum, you need a Part 107 certified pilot with you. What they can do is just supervise and only take over in such case that you run into difficulty and need assistance. That's what determines whether it's recreational or not. TFR is a NOTAM. All right, I know I'm using those acronyms and it's always so tough to understand what people are talking about. A TFR is easy. It's a temporary flight restriction. And it's a type of notice to airmen, which is what NOTAM is. A TFR gives you very specific fine points of a restriction that's been set. It may be for a hazardous condition like fire, where there's a lot of smoke in the air, and so it's reduced the visibility incredibly. It might be a special event like professional ball games over an open stadium. Those all have regulations where for a couple hours before, during the game, and a couple hours after, you are not allowed to fly anywhere near that stadium. Or any type of warning that they just may have in the FAA airspace. Also, they use TFRs when the president lands at an airport. So that's what those are used for. You want to be sure to follow all local ordinances so you aren't in trouble with your local law enforcement officers. Sometimes homeowners associations and city, county, or even state parks and beaches may or may not allow drones. This means you cannot launch or land from that property. It does not mean you cannot fly in that airspace. Only the FAA actually controls the airspace, but people have the right that own property to say that you cannot launch or land from that property. That is within their right. What are the technical requirements for a drone? Okay, you have your drone, you have the controller, which is hooked to a phone or a device, and that reaches out for the GPS signal. That's hardwired to your device, by the way. And then it sends, through a link, it sends a signal to the drone. That link is equipment inside that's a receiver and a transmitter. So you transmit from the device to the drone and it picks it up. And that's what makes it all work. It's all really pretty cool, I think. So what happens when you have no GPS signal? Did you know a drone can actually be flown without the GPS? It's what's called attitude mode, but it must be done very carefully. It's easy to crash when you don't have GPS. You can fly into things more easily as well. GPS helps you keep things more consistent, and it identifies exactly where the craft is. It maintains that constant hover for you where it really doesn't move much when it's actually not being flown. When you're in attitude mode, you'll often see the drone kind of drift. It drifts around in a space. It might be 3 to 6 foot distance where it's just kind of moving around in the sky as you try to hover. That's because you actually need to fly the craft. It doesn't have the stabilization assistance offered by GPS. You have to be much more careful. I do not advise a beginner use attitude mode at all, and you want to be very careful when you first start using it so you understand everything how it works, because your return to home and such isn't all going to work exactly the same. Okay, you need to understand that you can have signal interference, and it can be a very scary thing. The reason is because most drones transmitters actually operate on the same 2.4 gigahertz band radio spectrum that is used by all the cellular telephone towers. And also your Wi-Fi routers, they all are using that same frequency. Therefore, any Wi-Fi signals in the area where you're flying your drone can interfere with the signal. Now, generally, it's my experience that if there are only a couple, say on the block where you live, that's not much of a problem. I do have a local area where I go where there's a lot of water. It's a large lake, and around that lake are a lot of resort type places, and they have Wi-Fi using a lot of Wi-Fi in certain areas in a really condensed space, and those have interfered with my drone. So I just want you to be aware of that, because we have an instance that can happen when you have interference. You can have what you call a flyaway drone, and it's scary. I had my first flyaway drone. I was real early into flying. I've been flying less than 6 months. I was at an event, and it just took off. Literally, it just went up in the sky, and it just started flying itself. And I was like, nothing was working. I hit the return to home. It wouldn't come home. And so the last resort, you run, you chase, you hope that you can find it before it does any damage. I was really lucky. Mine had bumped into a telephone and was hovering at about 5 feet off the ground, and a couple of people said, "Are you looking for a drone?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And they said, "It's right over there," and they pointed, and it was just hovering there. It was fine. It wasn't harmed, and I had my drone back. Often that's not the case. Often with a flyaway drone, it's gone, and you can use another drone to try to search for it. There's telemetry within your controller app which will tell you where it last had a signal and give you GPS points that you can put into another device to help you, and then you can go search with another drone. Good luck. I did actually find a different runaway experience also. I made a mistake in judgment. I lost my drone in the sky. My battery died. The drone landed. I was able to retrieve that drone only because the controller app's information plugged into my phone's GPS allowed me on foot to actually find the drone. Now, it took me over 2 hours because I actually had to reset the phone again and start over. And when I did, it was about 6 foot different with the GPS readings. And that was when I finally found that drone. That was a fun experience. I don't want to do it again anytime soon. Okay, all drones need updates for their firmware. And the truth is that you can do it over Wi-Fi, but it's not recommended. Almost all the manufacturers will highly recommend that you use an SD card to do this, to ensure that you don't have drone failure down the road because maybe a file within the larger file was dropped and that it's not a complete update. So you want to go to your computer, you want to download the needed file to an SD card. You want to put the SD card in your drone to provide the update. Now, once you run the update, the file is removed off the SD card. So you need to do it once for every battery that you own, because these are smart batteries and every battery needs that firmware update. So be sure to copy the file to the SD card again each time you insert a new battery. Then put that SD card in your drone, let it run through the update, and then you'll be good to fly again. The top drones in 2023 based on the PC Magazine are as listed. Your best for creators is the DJI Mini 3 Pro. And if you're looking at entry level, the DJI Mini 2. The best for photographers is actually the DJI Air 2S. And if you have kids, or if you're brand new to flying and you're afraid to invest a lot of money with the first drone that you may crash, you may want to look at the Rise Tello. Best for creators who are on a budget is the DJI Mini 3. And if you're into cinematography, you're going to want to look at the DJI Mavic 3. Autel Evo Lite Plus has the best for long flights. And if you like FPV, the first-person view, you'll want to try the DJI Avata. I hear it's really a great craft. Autel Evo Nano Plus offers the best 249-gram drone that we talked about earlier that doesn't need registered. That is, if you're not flying under FAA Part 107, and we'll talk about that more. And part of what people love about this is the no geofence. So there's not Big Brother telling you your drone can't fly here and shuts it down because you're in, say, a TFR area. It just doesn't do those things. You as a pilot are supposed to honor the rules and hopefully are doing that. So these are our crafts. There's just a picture for each of them for you. The DJI Mini 3 Pro for creators. your DJI Mini 2 for entry level, the DJI Air S2 for the photographers. You'll notice on all of these the cameras are slightly different, but basically the craft are almost the same on every one of them. They're just slightly different. Here's your Rise Tello for kids and new flyers, the DJI Mini 3 for creators who are on a budget, your DJI Mavic 3 for cinematographers, the Autel Evo Light Plus, the nice bright orange, which I like. I'm an Autel flyer. And this offers the long flights, the DJI Avata for FPV, and the Autel Evo Nano Plus, which is our 249 gram with the no geofence and doesn't need registered unless being flown under Part 107. There's a lot of industries that have benefited from drones, and this is just a few of them where you can make money. There's roofing and construction, agriculture, real estate, search and rescue missions, line inspections like for the telephone lines and cable themselves, infrastructure, all types of buildings, bridges, energy, utilities, and resources, and also a variety of insurance claims, including homes and properties. What's the difference between a Part 107 and an exception for the recreational flyers? Well, when you have a Part 107, you're allowed to fly your drone in places where you're not allowed to recreationally. A Part 107 also allows you to use your drone for business-related purposes, and it boosts your credibility as a drone pilot. Yes, Part 107 drone pilots can and often do fly recreationally also. There are limitations for flying a drone under an FAA 107 license without obtaining an additional waiver. So these are not legal to do unless you acquire a waiver. You cannot fly over 100 miles per hour ground speed. You cannot fly over 400 feet above ground level. There's a slight difference on this if you are flying under the FAA Part 107. You must have 3 statute miles of visibility. Now this includes vertically 500 feet and also 2,000 feet horizontally to both sides from any clouds, smoke, or fog. You are not allowed to fly through a layer, and the reason should be obvious, is if you do, there might be a craft on the other side of that you aren't able to see until it's too late, and then you have a mid-air collision. We don't want any of those. That makes the industry look bad, and that would put more restrictions on us if that begins to happen. So you want to make sure you fly responsibly. The last is beyond visual line of sight. And I mentioned this earlier. Right now, we have regulations where I must keep my eye on my drone at all times. The furthest I've ever flown my drone was nearly a half a mile, not quite. My bright orange 1-foot drone was about a pin dot and white in the sky. Now, part of the regulation is you have to be able to tell the orientation, which the controller actually helps you with that on the device by pointing an arrow. So if you're very familiar with your drone, you should be able to tell which direction you are, and then what direction you're flying once you start moving. That's all part of the regulation about being able to see it, and it's within the visual line of sight. Now, a lot of people today will tell you, and you're hearing bragging stories about people that have taken it way beyond anything they can see. And they think because they see what's called first-person view, what the camera of the drone is seeing on their device, that's the same as seeing the drone. According to the FAA, that is not the same at all, and if you get caught doing it, they may likely confiscate the drone, and certainly you will not have an opportunity to apply for a Part 107 if you're looking to do that. So if you're going to be pursuing the Part 107 remote pilot certification, there are several ways that you can prepare for that. There is coursework that's offered by many variety of different people, and most of the prices are quite affordable for this specific purpose. You can self-study. I self-studied for mine. I'd be happy to share my YouTube playlist channel of the resources that I used to pass. However, I will make a note here that flying over people and night flights have newer rules which are not covered in these resources, as I was certified before these changes took place 2 years ago. Now, testing for the FAA Part 107 remote pilot certification is controlled by the FAA, and you must take your initial testing by a certified center. The test is proctored, where they can keep a control on what materials you have access to for the test. There is a $175 fee to take this test, and you must schedule ahead. In order to become certified, you have to pass with 70%. If you fail the test, you can take it again. You have to wait 14 days, and you have to pay the fee again. You want to make sure you're well prepared so you don't have to pay for that twice. Now, once you have your Part 107 certification, it falls under what is called recurrent. So every 2 years, you have to get recertified. And the way you do that is to take a short course online at the FAA.gov website and pass with 100% accuracy. So you can keep changing the answer until you get it correct, because it has to be 100%. Once you finish the test with 100%, then you can print that out and keep it included with your current certification, which is your proof that you have currency. Your Part 107 certification never expires. A lot of people don't really understand this, but it does fall out of currency. You never have to start over the whole process over again. You just have to go to this online spot and take the test. Once you pass it with that 100%, you're in good standing with the FAA once again. They used to make you go in and take it at the same testing center, pay the fee for it, and then you got your recurrent. They took that away 2 years ago. You also want to be aware that the FAA can revoke a license for unreported accident worth more than $500 property damage, or where you've injured an individual. If you're flying while intoxicated, and there are some other situations that you'll want to make sure to make yourself aware of before flying. All drones that are flown under Part 107 missions must be registered with the FAA, even if they're under that 250-gram weight limit. This is a website where you can register your drones with the FAA. Drone registration must be renewed every 3 years, and it's only $5 per craft. Now, there are rules for recreational flyers. The 14 CFR, which is Part 107, referred to as the small UAS rule, does govern unmanned flights. However, if you want to fly recreationally, there is a limited statutory exception that's been carved out that provides a basic set of requirements. And those requirements are now covered through the Recreational UAS Safety Test, or TRUST, which is available online. And they encourage you to take and pass this at your earliest opportunity. You do need to carry proof of passage when you're flying. What is TRUST? Well, there's a law that requires now recreational flyers to pass an aeronautical knowledge and safety test, and to provide proof of passage if you're asked by law enforcement or an FAA personnel. The Recreational UAS Safety Test, or TRUST, was developed to help us meet this requirement. TRUST provides education and testing on important safety and regulatory information. If you fly your drone recreationally under the exception for recreational flyers, you must pass this test before you fly. Also, before you fly, and I've covered this but we'll mention again, even recreationally, if your drone weighs more than 0.55 pounds, 250 grams, you must register your drone through the FAA's Drone Zone. And that registration is $5 per aircraft, and it's good for 3 years. To fly as a recreational flyer is actually very easy. You have 3 steps that you need to follow. 1. Understand what the recreational flying requirements are. So you want to visit the FAA.gov site and learn what those flyer rules are. Then you want to go on your phone or your tablet that you're going to use with your controller and download the Before You Fly app. This is going to give you information about whether it's legal to take off where your drone is sitting. Number 2, you take that trust test that we've talked about. There are a number of free online providers of this test. You need to go to one of them, take the test. It's correctable through. You need 100% in order to pass. Once you reach that, you need to download or save it and then print out the certification. That needs to be on you at times when you're flying. If you lose this certification, you have to retake trust. After the last 3rd step here, I will show you a list of trust test administrators. So the 3rd test part is really actually easy. After you've taken the test, you're just going to get a certificate. You need to print that out so that you have a record and keep a copy of it in case you're asked for it by a law enforcement officer or an FAA personnel. So here are 9 of those types of organizations that offer these tests for free. And this next page has 8 more. You can note where this is on the video and come back to it in order to pick up the information. Okay, the FAA does not require drone pilots to carry any type of insurance. However, I highly recommend carrying at least liability insurance, even as a hobbyist. It's much like driving a car without insurance. If you get in an accident, you're going to find out how much you wish you hadn't done that. If you damage an $80,000 car or a specialized window or some type of screen, you're going to wish you had insurance. You're going to wish you'd bought insurance. So the best insurance for the amateur, actually, I found is through the Academy of Model Aeronautics. All you have to do is become a member with them. I believe it's $85 a year unless you're a senior, and then it's $75. And they automatically will cover you with, I believe, a $2.5 million liability policy. And that would be a really, really good idea. That way you don't end up stuck with some type of bill you can't afford to cover. Now I'll leave you with some drone resources here. You'll want to have access to the FAA.gov. There is a drone racing association that you might want to be part of, and Facebook has their group. The FAA Drone Zone, of course, is where you register your drones. And then if you go after your Part 107, the IACRA is where your license information, your certification is kept, and the rating that you received. Drone manufacturer websites and forums are listed here. So I have Autel and then their drone forum. And then I have DJI, and below that, their drone forum. The one specifically for Mavic, Air, and Mini. If you have a Phantom or a different craft, you're going to want to go to the forum that's for that specific craft. And then we have the Parrot manufacturer website and their forum for Parrot. I hope you got some great value and learned some things from this presentation. If you'd like to contact me, feel free to reach out on an email to thedronegal@leigh-scheidel.com. Now I'd like to open us up for a question and answer session, or if you have any great stories you'd like to tell us of drone, we'd love to hear it. Thank you so much for spending your time with us.